once we're very clear on who we are targeting, how we position the podcast accordingly, the next question is, how do we find and build a list of potential guests that we are going to reach out to? So you have multiple ways to find your ICP, and we've sorted them in order of the highest likelihood of them accepting to come on your podcast. It is very likely, regardless of the niche that you're in right now, that there are other existing podcasts in your niche with the same type of guests. And not only it's very clear and obvious to see if they are your ICP, because they will be in the show notes of the podcast, the description of who the guest is, but you also know that they are willing to go on other people's podcasts because this is it, they've been on a podcast. So this is always, and when we onboard with a client, this is always where we start with. What we start with, we look at other industry podcasts and we go and reach out to the guests that we want on the show. Simple as that. And we do this for ourselves. Again, so consulting leaders, there are a ton of podcasts in the consulting space, some active, some inactive. We just look at the guests that interest us and we reach out to them. And that's something that I want to double down on in the sense of how should I name the podcast? How do I make sure that my brand is very, very, unique, stands out? And that's kind of the thing I often say. Building a brand with a podcast is totally an okay play, but it's going to take 3 years. Like building a brand from the ground up with a podcast that is going to get you inbound leads without you to have to do anything except for 3 years of podcasting is going to take 3 years. Now, while this is still a viable strategy, if you want to wait that amount of time, inviting your ideal clients as a guest on the show is a much better way to get a fast ROI. And for that, you want the podcast to be clear, simple, and obvious, and it doesn't need to stand out that much. You will stand out during the interview by chipping in and saying the right things. We're going to cover this at the right time whilst you interview the guest. When we came up with the rebranding of our podcast, Consulting Leaders, we looked at all the name of the podcast, and it was like, yeah, we're not going to differentiate like consulting success, leaders in consulting, consulting impact, strategy. Like there is already plenty of podcasts in that space, and yet we don't really struggle to get guests on the show. I'm going to show you that as well. So other niche podcasts is a very good place to start because it is very likely that there are other podcasts doing the same thing or at least interviewing your ICP on their podcast. Once we kind of tap into that source, or if we really, and we recently had a client like this, it's unique. We are creating the concept in that niche, which can happen. Then we look at other ways. So finding businesses on Google, obviously doing a manual research works. What we tend to do is we use databases. So Albert mentioned a few of them, Apollo, ListKit, ZoomInfo. So here you can have a very precise and specific targeting by having the right filters in. And then you just pay a few dollars or a little bit less per lead, depending on how many you want. But so this is very good. This gives you contact details. We run it through a few softwares to make sure that it's not going to bounce and this is the right email address, and we enrich them. And then we reach out to the people. Something that allows us to get quick wins, and something that you want to consider if you're considering this strategy, is to look at your existing sales pipeline, and more specifically the lost leads or the leads that are dormant from the last 6 to 12 months, and reactivate them. So going back to them and saying like, hey, John, I know we stopped the conversation there. I recently launched a podcast. We only interview ICP and we talk about the things that you want to talk about. I would love to have you on. This will usually get a very high response rate because they already have a relationship with you, they know you, and they are likely to say yes. So lost leads are people who basically entered into your ecosystem, who gave you their email address but never booked a call, people who didn't open emails or opened emails, clicked but didn't move forward, people who booked a call but didn't show up, people who showed but didn't buy. All those people, you want to reach back and be like, hey, I'm launching a podcast, only interviewing people like you. You want it to be a bit of an ego stroke. So think about leaders in that niche, or gurus or influencers or experts in that niche. And I'd like to have you on. Very likely that they say yes. That's a reactivation point, and you can pick up the sales conversation again. If you run a professional services firms and you are not growing as fast as you'd like, then I'd like to give you a free gift. My team and I have put together the B2B Podcasting Secrets Playbook, which is basically 3 years of my teams and I knowledge, solving branding and lead generation for good for professional services firms. So if this is you, then your business growth is directly linked to the number and the quality of the relationships that you're able to build with actual decision makers, also whilst building reputation and brand. And we got pretty good at helping people like you do exactly that using podcast. So the playbook has 9 sections, from how to even position it, to finding the first guests, how to transform content and guests into clients, all the way up to becoming the #1 influencer in your space. It includes visuals, videos, text, and templates, and case studies relevant to each and every section. And if you want to go even faster, then on the thank you page, you can book a call directly with my team, and we will look at your firm, see if we can help. And if so, we'll put together a tailored plan for your specific podcast that you can use and implement.